Hi, I'm Jason, the Curious Psychiatrist. I love art, history, and science, and today I'm going to talk about an extraordinary time when art and history met at a crossroads. The 18th and 19th centuries were interesting times. Before, societal change and progress were measured in centuries, but now it was being measured in decades and sometimes years. So much happened at the same time that the history buff in me cannot help but talk about it. And at the intersection of the three great events of the time, the French Revolution, the Industrial Revolution, and the Age of Enlightenment, were the Impressionists. Let's see how they were influenced, how they came to be, and what they left behind. So, let's get going. The influence of the three big events can all be seen in the story of the Impressionists. So, let's start with the French Revolution. And by the French Revolution, I don't mean the French Revolution, but all the upheaval and change that happened in France during the 18th and 19th centuries. For a brief recap, Louis XIV and XV were the last kings of the Ancien regime. Louis XVI, who came next, inherited a country with huge debt and extreme social inequality and an angry populace aching for change. Eventually, they took matters into their own hands and started the French Revolution, which lasted from 1789 to 99, and countless heads were chopped off, including those of Louis XVI and Robespierre. Then, after a decade of turmoil, a political star emerged with the popularity and brains to seize leadership. His name was Napoleon. His time lasted from 1799 to 1815 and is called the First Empire. And sadly, it didn't last. After Waterloo, he was sent far away and the Bourbon monarchy was restored. Louis XVIII and Charles X ruled for a while until Charles made a mess, got kicked out, and the July monarchy instituted a constitutional monarchy under Louis Philippe. After that, another Napoleon rose to power, first as president, during the Second Republic, and then changed his title to Emperor Napoleon III, starting the Second Empire. He messed up by going to war against Prussia's Bismarck and Moltke, and ended up being captured. This led to the Third Republic, which was the political structure until World War II. Isn't all this exciting? Well, I know it wasn't for the thousands who lost their heads or the millions who suffered, but as a student of history, I cannot hide my fascination. And all these changes in regimes had a significant impact on art. Back then, the bond between art and the state was strong, as the state was the main buyer and commissioner of art and also relied heavily on art to influence public opinion. In France, this influence was channeled through the Salon de Paris. It was the pinnacle, the biggest art show, and sometimes the only opportunity for the public to view art. Near certain fame and fortune lay beyond its doors, so everyone wanted to go through them. But because of space restrictions, not all submissions could be accepted, so a panel of jurors was appointed to select the best works. The Salon was managed by the Académie des Beaux-Arts, which was established by the restored Bourbon monarchy, which in turn was an extension of the Ancien Regime. The administration wanted to remind people of the good old days before the revolution when France was strong and they had a king as bright as the sun. To do this, the Académie reinstated conservative and restrictive rules, and the Salon started to accept biblical or classical paintings or those idealizing the past exclusively. These trends were largely maintained during the 19th century. Napoleon III had grabbed power through a coup and was just as keen to promote nationalist pride in his subjects. And the incentives for acceptance were even higher during his reign. He did a complete makeover of Paris, meaning those who were accepted to the Salon could earn commissions for newly erected government buildings. After Napoleon III abdicated, the communal government at the start of the Third Republic became even more conservative in order to restore national pride after the humiliating defeat to Prussia. The Impressionists were born into this chaotic and culturally repressive climate. If you wanted to paint, you could only paint certain themes. If you wanted acceptance, then you had to follow outdated rules and suck up to the jury of the Salon. And if you didn't, then you either starved or quit. The Impressionists wanted to paint, and they wanted to paint their own way. But since they couldn't use the usual channels, they had to find their own way and perhaps start their own revolution. The second big event was the Industrial Revolution. It started in Britain in the 18th century and later spread to France. The Industrial Revolution led to an exponential increase in economic growth and a large middle class. And as living standards improved, this class started to become interested in art. They wanted to decorate new homes with paintings on the walls. And since they didn't know what was good and what was not, they flocked to the Salon, as the works there had the stamp of approval from specialists. Another change appeared in production, which can be called production without demand. Before the revolution, items were made following orders, and production followed demand. For instance, if you wanted a dress, you went to your local seamstress, placed an order, and received it sometime later. However, after the revolution, factories churned out huge quantities of ready-made clothes, regardless of demand, and they were hung in shops so customers could see them and be tempted to buy them. Production could even drive demand, making people purchase things they hadn't known they wanted. The same thing happened with the Impressionists. They kept on painting, even though there was no real demand for their works, and ended up giving the public something they had never seen before and hadn't known they wanted. The last event I'd like to talk about is the Age of Enlightenment. It was a movement by scholars about becoming enlightened through logical reasoning rather than religious beliefs. You can think of it as a certain trend followed by academics of all fields, rather than a body of knowledge or beliefs taught by a certain group. It influenced nearly all European academic thought in the 18th and 19th centuries. A change brought by the Enlightenment was an increased demand for knowledge and publications, with several newspapers, journals, and magazines all catering to the public. In France, the relative freedom of press during the July monarchy led to even more demand. But then, this was clamped down hard on by Napoleon III. As political news and views became banned, journalists started to focus on culture to fill the void. Some started to report on art full time, becoming the first art critics. And they, in turn, fueled interest in art and themselves by writing sensational articles. Other important factors of the Enlightenment are tolerance and an emphasis on debates. Beforehand, ideas other than religious orthodoxy were not permitted, and if you didn't follow the rules, you were locked up at home or burned at the stake. But as the movement spread, academics became interested in new ideas, exercised tolerance, and eagerly debated each other over a cup of tea. In this atmosphere, Manet and his friends started to discuss and debate the virtues of painting outside. A radical notion indeed. And having their own show. Perhaps an even more radical notion. We've seen how the French Revolution, the Industrial Revolution, and the Age of Enlightenment all influenced the Impressionists. Next week, let's see how they came to be and what they left behind. Thank you for joining me today, and please stay tuned.